Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Mexborough and Swinton webinar. Roy obtained a degree in physics from the University of Bradford and a Master of Science in Engineering. He later worked as IT manager for Sheffield Hallam University at Salters Lane, that was the art college part, before it was knocked down. After working for over 30 years in Sheffield Hallam University, Roy has now settled down to a busier life as retired. A prolific speaker for Probus, UA3 and WI groups, as well as astronomical societies. So please put your hands up in a Mexborough and Swinton way and welcome Roy Gunson.
You should have the title screen now. Maria Mitchell, an American astronomical pioneer. She's probably the most famous female astronomer in America, and at her time she probably rivaled the same as Caroline Herschel or Mary Somerville that we had in the UK. She was born in 1818 in Nantucket Island, Massachusetts. She was the third child of 10. Now Nantucket is about 30 miles away from Cape Cod, and she was the third of 10 children. Now you might wonder where Nantucket is, so I've got a map. There's Nantucket with the little, this is from Google, good old Google. So this little island here is Nantucket. So we've got Boston, New York is down here, and this little curly bit here is Cape Cod. So a bit closer idea of the map region. Obviously when we colonized it before the American Revolution, these places were named mainly, it looks like, after places in Cornwall. We've got Falmouth, we've got Barnstable, there's another one somewhere, Truro is up here. So they always pinch names off of England where they settled. Martha's Vineyard is here. That's, you can get that on t-shirts. It's famous as a rich area, and even Nantucket these days is quite an exclusive tourist destination. Apparently the price for a small family home there in 2018 was about $2.5 million. One of the things about Nantucket is that it was famous for whaling industry. This is a drawing out of the museum there, which in 1820 a whale attacked a sailing ship, and this actually inspired Herman Melville to write his famous novel Moby Dick. And Captain Ahab was actually based from Nantucket in this story. In 1812, which is just before Maria Mitchell was born, there was the 1812 war between America and Britain, 1812 to 1815. And the Brits, we blockaded the eastern seaboard of America as a result, and this created great hardship for the people living in Nantucket. So they took it upon themselves to get their own peace treaty with Britain so that they could go it alone and continue whaling. It was probably a good deal for both sides, because the biggest customer for the whale blubber and whale oil was Britain itself, for the oil lamps and what was used in industry at the time. But they sort of went their own way. Majority of people in Nantucket were Quakers, and the Quakers taught, amongst other things, equality of education between the sexes. And even though the Quaker females were actually better educated and better regarded than mainly women in mainland USA, the women there still lack the rights to own property or vote, amongst other things. So here's the mother and father of Maria, William Mitchell and Lydia Coleman. The Quakers. He was a scientist, a school teacher. he came from what we'll call today a middle-class family. He actually was one of the early attendees at Harvard University and had a degree in mathematics and philosophy. He married Lydia in 1812 at the height of the war, and would go on to become a teacher and amateur astronomer. He had a cousin called Walter Folger, who was a famous scientist of the day, a clockmaker and telescope maker, and he helped William in his endeavours. So the family tree, as you well know that I get involved with ancestry and family history, so this is the family tree of the Mitchells. You can see Maria there, the third child of 10, born in 1818. Picture on the right top there is Maria and 4 of her sisters. I don't know who the other sisters are, but that's Maria there, circled in red. The chap alongside his brother Henry, he went on to become an oceanographer, mapping the eastern coastline of the USA, and he was one of the original founders of the National Geographic Society. So he became fairly well regarded as well. So Maria, she attended Elizabeth Gardiner's small school as an infant. She then went on to join the North Grammar School, where her father was a principal, and when she was 11 her father decided to make his own school, and Maria attended this school as a student and later as a teaching assistant. William Mitchell, Maria's father, had a few lucrative sidelines. One of them was adjusting ship's chronometers, which his knowledge of astronomy helped. For sailing ships of that day it was really important to have an accurate chronometer. There was no GPS, and a clock was very useful in working out the position of the ship at sea. Presumably he had some decent clocks at home to calibrate. Perhaps his cousin had helped with this because his cousin was a clockmaker. He also worked for the United States Coastal Survey, surveying the land. He also sent astronomical measurements and calculations to William and George Bond at Harvard University, who were in charge of the observatory there. So he had a sort of a steady stream of income. During this time the family moved to Vestal Street in Nantucket, where the Maria Mitchell Museum stands today. You can see on the right, it's a current picture from Google Maps of the house. It's now a museum. You can see there is a plaque by the door. And William had a small reflecting telescope, and they used it from a platform built on the roof of the house. And you see the observing platform that they were to use for some of the astronomical work. Now and again Mr. Mitchell had to be away from home, and in his absence Maria began to correct the ship's chronometers on her own. So you can imagine there's a young girl of maybe 13, 14, dealing with whaling ship captains and adjusting what to them would be a precious instrument, a chronometer, to make sure it's correct and telling the right time. It's claimed in some of the biographies that in 1831 there was a total annual eclipse of the sun centred over Nantucket, and that Maria stood by her father's side counting the seconds as he observed the eclipse through a telescope. If you look at the NASA eclipse site, you notice that the track of the eclipse, where the best part of the annual eclipse takes place, does miss Nantucket. So either they measured the timing of a partial eclipse, or they moved some miles inland to see, as I said, the full eclipse. I can't imagine an astronomer today thinking I'll stop here and catch a partial eclipse when, you know, the almost full, the proper annual eclipse is so close by. But back to her studies. Maria was a great diary writer throughout her life, and from these diaries and notes we can get glimpses of her thoughts and actions. William Mitchell ensured that Maria had a good ground in mathematics, and here's one of the books that she recorded in her notes as having studied as a teenager, a thing called Coburn's Algebra. She was around the age of 13 or 14 when she read this. You can get it on Google Books. Here's an example of some of the stuff inside that. Yeah, it's not bad for a 13-year-old. What's the third power of A plus B plus C? So get the cube of that, and that's the example of how to do it. I think that's pretty good for a 13-year-old. And remember, in the main, she's being self-taught. She's reading this and understanding it on her own. So we get to 1835. Maria's a hard worker. She wants to earn her own living. By the time she was 16, she was no longer a student, but she went to teach mathematics at a school run by the Reverend Cyrus Pierce, who was presumably the local pastor of the Quaker church, if they have such a thing. I don't know much about the Quaker religion. The following summer, age 17, she helped her father survey the island of Nantucket for a new map for part of his work for the Coastal Survey, and then she opened a grammar school of her own. It says age 17. And this is an advert from the local paper, the Nantucket Inquirer. Maria Mitchell proposes to open a school for girls on the 1st of next month at the Franklin Schoolhouse. Instruction were given in reading, spelling, geography, grammar, history, natural philosophy, arithmetic, geometry and algebra. And she's going to charge $3 a quarter, so it's about $12 a year. Non-admitted under 6 years of age. A year later, she was offered what would become her ideal job, which she would stick at for some time. And that was the librarian at the Nantucket Athenaeum. She's basically a library and community centre. She got a salary from the Athenaeum. It wasn't a lot. It was just $60 a year. After a few years, she did get a rise to $100 a year. She would probably have earned more as a schoolmistress, but on the upside, she had as many books as she wanted to read and lots of time to do it and study, as the Athenaeum was only open to the public about 15 to 20 hours a week. Her father's reputation was growing, and he was friends with William Bond, who had founded the Harvard Observatory, and frequently visited Nantucket with colleagues. So this gave Maria the chance to know many of the well-known scientists of that area of the USA and the work. In 1837, William Mitchell got another job, which was cashier of the Pacific Bank in Nantucket, and presumably that's a bit like a branch manager, but it gave him a decent salary to support his family, and one of the perks of that job was the use of apartment buildings by the bank. The bank building was large enough that Maria and her father were able to set up another observatory, and William Bond came from Boston to Nantucket to help. The equipment that William Mitchell already owned was supplemented by instruments lent to him by the US Coastal Survey, and this included a 4-inch refractor. So Maria and her father could do work for the Coastal Survey and have the use of the telescope for their own observations. She was a busy girl. Notes from a diary is this. This is a day in the life. I was up before 6, made the fire in the kitchen and made coffee. Then I set the table in the dining room and made the fire there. Toasted bread, trimmed the lamps. Rang the breakfast bell at 7. After breakfast I made my bed and put up my room. Then I came down to the Athenaeum and looked over my comet computations till noon. Before dinner I did some tatting and made 7 buttonholes for Kay. I dressed and then dined. Came back again to the Athenaeum at 1:30 and looked over another set of computations, which took me till 4 o'clock. I was pretty tired by that time and rested by reading Cosmos. Cosmos was something a bit like Strand magazine or Punch. Had stories and information, on cities and foreign countries. Lizzie came in and I gossiped for half an hour. I went home to tea, and that over I made a loaf of bread. Then I went up to my room and read through, partly writing, 2 exercises in German, which took me 35 minutes. It was stormy and I had no observing to do, so I sat down to my tatting. Lizzie came in and I took a new lesson in tatting so as to make the pearl edged. I made about half a yard during the evening. At a little after 9 I went with Lizzie and carried a letter to the post office. I had kept steadily at work for 16 hours when I went to bed. Tatting is a form of lace making for collars, cuffs and doilies. She was a busy old girl, really. I mean, not many would do that today. So, over this period at the Nantucket Athenaeum, while she was librarian for 20 years, many notable academics visited the Athenaeum in Nantucket to give public talks. You might have heard of someone, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was a famous poet and novelist. Henry David Thoreau, he was a naturalist. He also wrote essays on civil disobedience. Louis Agassiz, he was Professor of Zoology and Geology at Harvard. And as part of her job, Maria had to entertain and show these people around. She also was one of the founding members of a literary club for Nantucket, which they had to do poems and write little stories. Maria Mitchell contributed a poem every Monday. Even though the contributions were anonymous, it's on record that one such tale described a lunatic's view of the Earth on the night of an eclipse, while another described an imaginary tour of several planets. So we can presume that that's Maria's work. Again, in a diary, this is some other things she's doing. She's obviously using a position to run an unofficial night school, giving instruction of navigation to young apprentice sailors. This is a diary entry. A young sailor boy came to see me today. It pleases me to have these lads seek me out on their return from their first voyage and tell me how much they have learned about navigation. They always say with pride, I can take a lunar with a sextant to determine a ship's position and work it up. So she's teaching the sailors how to navigate across the sea. 1843, her brother Andrew was asked to resign from the Quaker because he married a non-Quaker. It's pretty much a tied religion, and Maria also decided that she would move away from her childhood religion. The minutes of the Nantucket's Women's Society in September 1843 recorded that Maria Mitchell informed us that her mind was not settled on religious subjects and that she had no wish to retain her right of membership, so it is concluded to disown her. And from that point forward, Maria attended the Unitarian Second Congregational Church in Nantucket. This is the building that was built in 1837. That's a modern picture again. Thanks to Google, we can see all these things. July the 13th, 1846, a fire began in a hat store on Nantucket's main street. Very quickly it spread through all the wooden buildings. Because of the whaling industry, barrels of whale oil was stored by the quayside on the wharves, and these contributed to the firestorm. It flowed into the water, creating a sea of fire. For 7 hours, basically, Nantucket burnt. Most of the centre of the town lay in ashes. Some 250 buildings had been destroyed. All the markets, shops and factories that processed whale oil, a dozen warehouses, and a lot of the town's wharves and many homes. It also destroyed the Athenaeum Library and Museum and some of Maria's notes and diary entries. But along with the committee, Maria set out to rebuild the Athenaeum, and it actually only took a year to rebuild. There is a modern picture of what it looks like today, and that is substantially the building that was finished, completed in May of 1847, just a year after the fire. And you can see a notice in the papers, the Athenaeum notice over here, the curators of the Nantucket Athenaeum leave to inform friends at the institution, both at home and abroad, that the Great Fire of 1846, all the valuable curiosities comprised in the museum were destroyed, and they put an appeal for their fellow citizens and the public at large for aid in establishment of a new collection of rare things, which they did. And as I say, it was libraries and schools and universities donated something like 2,000 books, volumes to the library, and it's opened by business again, as I say, in just a year after the fire. For what Maria became famous, 1847, October the 1st, Maria, she'd climb up to the rooftop observatory as usual, and looking through the 4-inch telescope, she spotted something new, something that looked like a fuzzy star close to Polaris in Ursa Minoris, and it was a previously undetected comet. She told her father, William Mitchell, who wrote to William Bond at Harvard University, and he asked Bond if the comet had been seen by anyone else, or by his son George, who was also hunting for comets. Unfortunately for Maria, by the time William Mitchell's letter reached William Bond in Boston, Father De Vico at the Vatican Observatory in Rome had already announced his discovery of the same comet on October the 3rd, and the rules for awarding a discovery must be announced immediately, so it seemed that Maria had lost her chance for this. But when Professor Bond told the president of Harvard College, Edward Everett, about Maria's discovery, he began a campaign to get Maria recognised as first discoverer, especially as there was a prize as well and the notoriety involved. Also, at that stage, no American had actually been involved in discovering a comet. So, everybody tries to claim first dibs at seeing a comet. Here's the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society in 12th of November, and we've got the new comet. A correspondent writes as follows: the comet discovered last week by Mr. Dawes of Camden Lodge, Cranbrook, was observed here last night. So the Royal Astronomical Society are putting a certain Mr. Dawes as the discoverer. I think this was October the 7th he claimed to have seen it, and there's details of where he saw it in Hercules, and it's perfectly visible through an ordinary night glass. But by November, the American onslaught from Harvard College is actually starting to take note, and this again is the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society a little later, 12th of November 1847, a month later. And this comet was seen in America on October the 1st by Miss Maria Mitchell of Nantucket, and was observed by the Observatory at Cambridge on October the 7th. It was seen October the 3rd at Rome by Father De Vico, October the 7th by Mr. Dawes. So she's now starting to get acknowledgement that she was the first discoverer. And further on, this is the American Journal of Science. This was published in May 1848, and it's written by William Mitchell, so this is Maria's father, and he's saying this body has been denominated by Professor Pierce, was first discovered by Maria Mitchell of Nantucket. So they're pushing Maria as the discoverer. One of the things they used to do in those days was actually work out the elements of the comet's orbit. And if we look at this, this is the calculations. So here we have the calculations that were done at the time. So George Bond of Harvard College is working out the perihelion passage, November the 14th. The distance is 0.3468 astronomical units. longitude of perihelion, the inclination of its orbit. So Maria's own figures are here. I mean, the current figures actually on the Jet Propulsion Labs database. So we have the perihelion distance of 0.329 compared to 346 or 341. The inclination is interesting here. The inclination there is given as 108. Both Harvard and Maria give 71, but they mention it's retrograde. So now we don't mention retrograde. What we do is everything swings over. So if you take 72 or 71 from 180, you will get 108. 108 plus 72 is 180 degrees. So we now just swing it past the 90 degrees, whereas in Victorian times you mentioned it was retrograde. But the figures that they worked out were quite close. Longitude of perihelion 274 degrees, 276 degrees. Currently it's 276.6. So, you know, it's not bad. They've not got computers to work these out. I mean, we're looking at 1847. Everything was worked out longhand. So, before 1839, the King of Denmark was Frederick VI, and he decreed that anyone who discovered a telescopic comet was to be awarded a gold medal. He died in 1839 and was succeeded by his son Christian. There he is, Christian, on the right hand side in his nice red velvet suit. He's got a lovely stomach just like mine. He obviously eats well, and Christian continued to award this medal. Now, because of the time delay in Maria's discovery being known and announced, and cross-continental communication, the gold medal had been presented to Father Di Vico of the Vatican Observatory. He'd reported the comet 2 days after Maria's discovery on October the 3rd. Now, American scientists were always struggling to get recognition in what at that time was considered to be the centre of the scientific world, which was London and Paris. But a large amount of support was forthcoming on behalf of Maria Mitchell from many well-known astronomers in the United States and elsewhere, and the committee finally decided to award the gold medal to Maria on October the 6th, 1848, 1 year and 5 days after her discovery. Father Vico had received his medal within 2 weeks, and it's unclear whether he was asked for it back. However, he did die in November 1848, just a month later in London, mainly because he was exiled from Italy and the Vatican because of the revolution of the Italian states, Garibaldi and all that lot back in Italy. There was times of troubles, and the troubles would go on for about 12 years in Italy. Here's a picture of the medal. It's in the museum, I think at Vassar. It was on side of the medal has a portrait of King Christian, while the reverse depicts the goddess of Urania, the muse of astronomy, and she's got a globe in her left hand and a stylus in her right, and above her are the words in Latin which translate as "Not in vain do we watch the setting and the rising of the stars," while above her are the words "Comet of Vassar, 1st October 1847, or Comet Scene, I think. And the outer edge of the medal is engraved with Maria Mitchell's name. It's noted in the press. I try and look for as many local papers as I can. The nearest I could get was our Broth Guide on Saturday the 30th of December 1848, and it says there, the King of Denmark has directed the Comet Medal founded by one of his predecessors be awarded to Miss Maria Mitchell of Nantucket in the United States for her discovery of the telescopic comet on the 1st of October 1847. We also have, later on, she's inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1848. She's the first woman to be so honoured, and it'd been almost a century before another woman was recognised by the Academy. She got a grant of $100 for this. This is actually reported in the Sheffield Independent, so this is our paper, or nearby paper here. A fair astronomer, Miss Maria Mitchell of Nantucket, discoverer of the comet which bears the name, was elected an honorary member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It goes on to say that it's very similar to the Royal Astronomical Society of London, where we have Miss Caroline Herschel and Mrs. Summerfield are ladies there. But it's the first time that any lady in America had been indicted into the American Academy. What's interesting to note, the certificate of entrance is here. So I have the honour to inform you that you were elected, and then they've crossed out fellow, and somebody's written in an honorary member of the Academy at a meeting of May the 29th, 1848. So because she's female, she can't actually be a fellow, she's got to be an honorary member. (1849), the New American Ephemeris and Nautical Almanac is started, and she's invited to work as a computer for this government project, producing tables of planetary positions and navigation. And Maria's assignment is to compute the tables predicting the daily position of the planet Venus. Lots of notable people are invited to do these computations, and here we can see Venus by Miss Mitchell is one of the people noted as providing. It means that she becomes the first professional female astronomer in America, and she gets $300 a year in addition to a salary at the Athenaeum. And one of the things she wants to do is to make plans to visit Europe. She wants to come and meet some of the notable scientists in England and Paris and Italy. She notes in a diary, and this is probably where she starts to become fairly active in women's rights. 1853, an article in a magazine by a Dr. Hall suggested that women were only fit for sewing and household duties, and she wrote this in a diary. It seems to me that the needle is the chain of woman, and has fettered her more than the laws of the country. Suppose every man should feel it his duty to do his own mechanical work of all kinds. Would society be benefit? Would the work be well done? Yet a woman is expected to know all kinds of sewing, all kinds of cooking, all kinds of any woman's work, and the consequences that life is passed in learning these only, while the universe of truth beyond remains unaltered. Same time, Harvard, photography is becoming a tool of astronomy, and the realization that sunspots occurred on an 11-year cycle has been announced, and this interests Maria, and she starts to get interested in astronomical photography and in particular solar astronomy. 1855, Maria's mother fell seriously ill, and she has to delay her plans for going to Europe, but her other sisters offers to nurse her mother. So in March 1857 she gets the chance to start a grand tour. R.K. Swift, Richard Kellogg Swift, is looking for somebody to chaperone his daughter on a trip to the continent, to Europe. Now, in some of the biographies of Maria Mitchell, it gives the name as H.K. Swift, but I did go through again ancestry and looked at names, and Richard Kellogg Swift was a banker in Chicago, and he had two daughters called Corinne and Prudence, and we know that Prudence was the name of the girl that Maria went to chaperone. So it's pretty evident that it's actually Richard Kellogg Swift, or R.K. Swift, and not H.K. Swift, as he noted in some of the biographies. So he was a banker, and she made her way to Chicago via Stagecoach to meet with the Swifts. Again, she writes in her diary, I had in early life a love for staging, but it is fast dying out. 9 hours over a rough road are enough to root out the most passionate love of that kind. Our stage was well filled, but in spite of the solid base, we occasionally found ourselves bumping up against the roof or falling forward upon our opposite neighbours. And she had to endure 5 days, each of 9 hours long, to get from Boston to Chicago on a stage. Where's John Wayne when you need him? So they went from Chicago by train to St. Louis, and then by steamboat down the Mississippi. On board this boat she actually observed an eclipse of the sun. This was March the 25th, 1857. It was totally Mexico, partial where Maria was. In New Orleans she visited a slave market, and her notes recorded her distaste and in her observations of what occurred in the slave market. And they returned to New York and set sail for Europe late in April 1857. She went well prepared. She'd got letters of introduction from friends, the director of the Smithsonian and Everett and Bond of Harvard University. So off she went to Europe. Amongst the people she met there, she met George Airy. He was the Royal Astronomer at Greenwich. He'd voted against Maria's winning the gold medal for her discovery of the comet, but he welcomed her, and actually they became friends and corresponded. There's George Airy. She also went to visit John Herschel, Sir John Herschel, in his home, and they struck up a lasting friendship. And she would actually write a book, Reminiscences of the Herschels, which also appeared in serial form in Century magazine. She also went to talk to William Henry Smythe, an admiral, pictured. He'd actually championed Maria's cause in England over the gold medal, and he was also the author of Double Stars, and probably at the time one of the experts of double stars in the world. And it's a subject that was becoming of interest to Maria. She also met this chap, John Crouch Adams at Cambridge. He was the chap who mathematically deduced the existence and location of the planet Neptune. She also visited Stratford-on-Avon and Edinburgh. I wondered what Prudence was doing. I mean, she's dashing around meeting all these scientists and astronomers, but I mean, she's supposed to be looking after poor old Prudence. But anyway, before Prudence and Maria could leave for France, word came from across the Atlantic of a financial crash in America, mainly because of the Californian gold rush and over speculation in railroad and lands, and Randolph Kellogg Swift, Prudence's father, had gone bankrupt, and Prudence had to return home. Maria was determined to stay in Europe and continue on a tour, and she met an American author, Nathaniel Hawthorne. There he is. And his wife and son, and they set out for Paris. In Paris she actually met this chap, Urbain Le Verrier. He was the chap who actually discovered Neptune, and then went on to Italy. She went to visit the Vatican Observatory and had to wait a few weeks because the observatory was also a monastery, and Father Angelo Secchi was the chief astronomer there. No woman was normally allowed there unless she had special permission from a cardinal, so it took time for the official permission to be granted. And then Father Secchi showed Maria the observatory, but only in daylight. She wasn't allowed there at night, and she notes in her diary, I should have been glad to stay until dark to look at nebula, but the father kindly informed me that my permission did not extend behind the daylight, which was fast leaving us, and conducted me to the door. He informed me that I must make my way home alone, adding, but we live in a civilized country. I did not express to him the doubt that rose in my thoughts. She went on to Naples and had a few days with Mary Somerville, the British mathematician and astronomer, who by now was 77. And they apparently, according to Maria's diary, discussed aspects of female suffrage and education, both subjects they were both passionate about. And then in Berlin she met with Alexander Humboldt, apparently discussed American politics with her and the field of astronomical photography. He was the first person really to describe the phenomenon and cause of human-induced climate change, back in 1800 and 1831, based on observations that he'd made during his travels. He'd also suggested the idea of continental drift. At the time they met, Humboldt was recovering from a stroke, and he was actually to die quite shortly after in 1859. So, back home in Nantucket, summer of 58, she's presented with a 5-inch telescope. It was a gift from a woman's group. They'd done subscriptions across the USA for her, and she then joined a search for the hypothetical inner planet that was speculated to lie inside Mercury's orbit. We now know these discrepancies are now due to relativity and the warping of space, rather than the gravitational pull of an inner planet. But there, April 1860, I've been intensely busy. I've been looking for the little inferior planet to cross the sun, which it hasn't done. I'm hoping to get something by the meeting of the Scientific Association in August, some paper, in order that my telescope may show it is in work. This is the new 5-inch telescope that she's been given as a gift. Her mother dies in 1861, and Maria and her father leave Nantucket to Lynn near Boston, only a few miles away from Harvard. These were troubling times because of the Civil War had started by now. Here's Lynn up here in Nantucket is down here, so they've moved up here. Harvard is somewhere around about where the U in United States here is. So it's somewhere around about there, Harvard. Her father is now in his 70s, but he's still on the board of the overseers of Harvard University and is the chair of the Harvard Observatory Committee. So she's still producing work. She's interested in double stars. Here's articles she's written in the American Journal of Science, July 1863. She's using the 5-inch equatorial telescope by Alvan Clark. This is the gifted telescope, and she's making notes and observations which she's now publishing. Matthew Vassar is a brewer, and he wants to found, or he does found a college for women, the Vassar College. It's meant to rival the male-dominated universities such as Harvard and Yale. It's still quite a prestigious college. He's a brewer. This is the college after it was built in 1867, and this is his brewery, a picture of his brewery, or a drawing for in 1865. This is where Vassar College is. So it's quite a distance. Lynn is up here and Nantucket is down here, so you can see it's a move. He offers Maria Mitchell a salary of $1,500 a year, keeping a job for the Nautical Almanac on the planetary positions, which she'd held for 16 years. And in the summer of 1865, Maria and her father moved into the living quarters at the brand new observatory at Vassar College. There you see a picture of the observatory. Again, a newspaper announcement. This is actually the Dublin Evening Mail, which is as near as I could get. The American papers announced that Miss Maria Mitchell has been appointed Professor of Astronomy in the Vassar Female College in Poughkeepsie, a position which her achieved acquirements in science admirably fit her to fill. She is known as the discoverer of a comet, for which she received a gold medal from the King of Denmark. The picture here on the left, this is Maria Mitchell, taken in 1865. At the time she moved to Vassar College. The first astronomy class of 1866. You can see some of the girls of a class using a transit circle. She's got 15 students. Transit circles are actually used for calculating the position of stars. They're usually fixed in a position that's pointing due south, so they just move up and down the meridian, the southern meridian, and people time when a star crosses the field of view to accurately get the position of the star in the heavens. They measure the height, measure the time. And this is why on astronomical maps you get declination in degrees, and the sideways motion, right ascension, is in hours and minutes. The notes she made say that she started her students on the first day by saying, "Stargazing is not science. The entrance to astronomy is through mathematics. You must make your mind up to steady and earnest work. You must be content to get on slowly and thoroughly. But we also need imagination in science. It's not all mathematics, not all logic, but is somewhat beauty and poetry." With her own money, Maria bought equipment for photographic work on the Vassar's telescopes and for sun and sunspot work, and trained her students to use it. She also required them to find a planet at any hour of the night and make drawings of the position of the satellites. This picture here is taken at Burlington, Iowa in 1869. It was a solar eclipse, and on the left, in a black dress holding a parasol, is Maria Mitchell, Professor of Astronomy. Maria Mitchell and Alida Avery were the only two female professors at Vassar, and they wrote a letter. "We desire to call your attention to the fact that after nearly 5 years of what we believe to be faithful working, our pay is still far below that which has been offered at entrance to the other professors, even when they have been wholly inexperienced. We request to be made equal to the other professors." The Board of Governors refused their request, and the two ladies threatened to leave. So in 1871 their salaries were raised. However, they were then charged rent for the accommodation, which again lowered their wages. As Maria's accommodation was also attached to the working observatory, and she held seminars in what was technically her living quarters, she protested, and she eventually got a rent decrease of about 50%. She also ran into trouble with the more religious elements at the college, one of the trustees of the college even writing a letter insisting Maria be dismissed. She, however, did have a faith, but didn't take some more pious members of staff seriously. She once wrote a letter to the president of Vassar. "My good-natured president, I want to hear you preach tomorrow, and I also want to see the moon pass over Aldebaran. Can't you let me do both? Won't you stop at 11? Why do you need to show us both sides of the subject? The moon never turns but the one side that we see." And again, notes. My class has come in today for the first time, 25 students, more than ever before. Fine, splendid looking girls. I felt almost frightened of the responsibility. I'm not going to sing this, I'll play you the tune, but every June at the end of the year she would hold a dome party, and the students would share cakes, strawberries, ice cream and sandwiches. And in 1872 students made up a song about Maria to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. If you want to sing along, do so. The words are there on the right. that's enough of that. Okay, sunspots. From 1873 onwards, Maria Mitchell pioneered daily photography of sunspots, and she was the first to suggest that they were whirling vertical cavities rather than clouds, as been earlier believed. There on the left hand side is one of her photographs, and there you can see the telescope sat outside in the daylight. Maria here is in front. 1873, she has a second European trip, mainly to Russia, to see Otto Struve at St. Petersburg Observatory. He was a solar observatory, and she wanted to visit the observatory there that were actually doing pioneering work in solar astronomy. And she stayed with Otto's family there. She was also interested in the education of women in Russia, and Russia had large numbers of women studying science in government colleges and also female medical schools. At this time, she joined the Association for the Advancement of Women's Congress for Rights in New York, becoming president of that association in 1875. So she's becoming quite prominent in the suffragette movement, as it were. 1878, she travels with the students to a total eclipse in Denver. Here you can see them set up. July the 29th, 1878. It says Professor Mitchell led an expedition of women students from Vassar to Denver to view the eclipse and to take scientific measurements during the event. Professor Mitchell used the trip and the scientific papers published during the event to demonstrate that women could be serious scientists. On Eclipse Day, she invited the press along to their observation post on a hill on the edge of Denver, and they set out wooden chairs, erected a small tent for shade, and mounted 3 telescopes. According to press, the newspapers reported the female student astronomers provided an attraction to the gaping yet respectfully distant multitude of masculines, almost as absorbing as the eclipse. A reporter wrote, Professor Mitchell herself, as with iron grey curls fluttering under a broad brimmed leghorn, she swept the heavens with a 4-inch telescope and directed with native majesty and grace the operations of her assistant nymphs. She was a figure and perfectly commanding. Slightly condescending, that, I think. So here's some more pictures of her astronomy class in 1878. And then, moving on, she became ill in 1880 and missed the whole first term. She was soon back up and running. There was photographs of the transit of Venus in 1882, and on the right hand side is the astronomy class of 1885, sat on the steps that lead from the observatory into her living quarters. Maria left Vassar in January 1888, moved back to Lynn with her sister Kate. They built a small observatory in the backyard, and she started to learn Greek. So there you see a picture on the right hand side of the small observatory that they built for her. She sat in a chair, but she became bedridden and died on June the 29th, 1889. It's thought that it was probably something like Alzheimer or dementia. It just calls it a disease of the brain. Sheffield Evening Telegraph actually notes a death. The death is announced of Miss Maria Mitchell, one of the foremost of American astronomers. Fairly brief, as is the Yorkshire Gazette. A few weeks later, the death is announced at New York of Miss Maria Mitchell, LLD. LLD degrees, an honorary doctorate, legum doctor, usually in law but other subjects. Miss Mitchell was an astronomer like her father, and at the early age of 18 became librarian at the Athenaeum of her native town Nantucket in Massachusetts. It's interesting, I mean, when she was growing up she would have studied probably by the light of an oil lamp, and steam engines, both rail and sea, were not around really, and she'd have seen all that, and in the end there would have been steam engines, steamships, the rudimentary electric light would have been coming into houses and public buildings, telephone, gramophone, photography, spectroscopy were all begun within a lifetime. Cornish Times has actually a better obituary. It actually details most of what I've said tonight. I'm not going to read it. It is there. It's fairly long-winded, and but explains everything that we've said tonight. And the legacy. Currently in Nantucket is the Maria Mitchell Association. It operates 2 observatories, a natural science museum, an aquarium, a research centre, and actually looks after the birthplace of Maria Mitchell. A wide variety of science and history related programming is offered throughout the year for people of all ages. They have astronomers, professional, studying various things in the sky, planets, stars, galaxies, etc. It looks after a couple of observatories. Lynn's Observatory houses a 7.5 inch which is used for public stargazing, and there's also a larger 24 inch which is used for the professional work. They also have a repository of over 8,000 glass photographic plates from observations taken between 1913 and 1995. Here is an example that they're all in negative. On the right hand side I've converted the negative to a positive representation. This is Andromeda on the plates, and these are actually available to access online. This is the smaller observatory. This is actually next to the house on Vestal Street where they first moved to. The house is here, over here on the right hand side, that we saw earlier in the talk, and here you can see the dome of an observatory just used for public events, mainly for school children and that sort of thing. But it was built in 1908. Harvard Observatory had a fellowship of the Harvard Observatory, the Maria Mitchell Memorial Fellowship, to a value of $500. I could only find out that it was held in 1918. It seems not to have been held ever since that. It was sort of a one-off. Why 1918 I don't know, but currently, and has done for many years, the Maria Mitchell Observatory have a research fellowship. It lasts a year. You can apply now if you're interested. It pays a salary of $30,000 a year. Position begins on September the 1st, 2021. And it will be held at the Maria Mitchell Observatory on the island of Nantucket. Apply now. Lots of documents available in the archives at Vassar College. Seeing the Sun, a book that she was involved in, The Wonders of the Moon, and as I mentioned, here is a front copy from Century magazine, Maria Mitchell's Reminiscence of the Herschels, written in January 1889, literally months before her death. And finally, some of the books that I went through to bring this together: Maria Mitchell, The Soul of an Astronomer, Maria Mitchell, Life, Letters and Journals, Phoebe Mitchell Kendall, and no, it's not a misspelling, my wife told me off, but that was how Phoebe's name was spelt, and that's obviously Maria's sister, who gathered together her diaries and letters and things that I've actually used for a lot of this talk. Maria Mitchell, the First Lady of Astronomy and Sweeper of the Sky, Life of Maria Mitchell. And that, folks, is the end of my talk. I'm going to stop the share and hand you back to Paul.
Thank you, Roy. What an interesting character. So it's question times, ladies and gentlemen. So, as usual, if you have a question, I'd prefer a digital hand. If you don't, wave at me, and we'll nominate you. So, Phil Muffet.
Yeah, hi. It's not a question. Just like to say that was a really interesting talk, Roy. I had no idea there was so much astronomy in the area. I visited Boston and that area back in 1990s, and I wish I'd known everything you just told me. I'd have looked it up. Been to Gloucester, but I never made it to Nantucket, but I wish I could have. We wasn't there long enough to visit. But that was fantastic. I really enjoyed that, Roy.
Okay, thank you, Phil.
I suppose
talk to us again.
Again, it's not particularly a question, but that telescope that she had in that observatory, it was a decent piece of kit. Yeah. She obviously had some good optics to observe through, and there's no wonder she did some good stuff.
Well, it was a 4-inch refractor. It was provided by the US Coastal Survey, so obviously they wanted some good stuff themselves, and they happened to pick on this. And don't forget, her father was friends with the people who ran Harvard Observatory, and he was doing work for them on computation, so they had access to this. His cousin was a telescope maker as well, which that would help as well. So they weren't actually starting from the bottom, as it were. They had contacts.
Yeah, absolutely impressive. You can't knock her. The other observation is it was incredibly sexist as well, wasn't it, at that particular time?
Very.
And think things have moved on a huge amount.
Huge amount.
I did a talk earlier about the girls from Harvard University under Pickering and the attitudes to them. And the fact they were paid a fraction of what the male students were paid to do the same work.
Yeah. Andy Davey.
Hi, Roy. Fascinating talk. Absolutely loved it. Just a question. You showed us an example of one of the photographs that you'd done, white light observations of sunspots. Yeah. Online, are there many such images, or are they all there, or what did you notice during your investigations?
I didn't actually delve that deep into what was there. I think some of them you have to request from the college archives. I don't think they've got every astronomical photograph online, but there are some. I mean, the one I picked out was the one of Andromeda, because I think I looked at about 10, and that looked the most interesting to put on the talk. But there is stuff there. There's notes on our observations, but I think for some of it you do have to actually write in a request. There's a great big written list of what documentation is there.
And I know from my own research here on different subjects, when you troll the newspaper archives and you find them little snippets,
yeah,
you have like a eureka moment, don't you, when you find these new discoveries? It's very rewarding, that sort of research, I find.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating how these things are reported and how long it. I mean, they complain about they gave the medal to the guy from the Vatican after basically a few days, and he says, "Oh, I've discovered a comet. Here, have the medal and the prize money." And then because of they're saying, "Oh, well, we had to get this information from America," but it was only a month. It was only about 4 to 6 weeks when she was actually getting recognition. But they'd already given this guy in Rome the money and the medal. I mean, they stamped the gold medal and given it, you know, here you are, pal. I mean, they were very quick to give it in, but it then took a year for her to get the medal back. And I didn't mention it, but it actually took a few more after it got to America. It did the rounds. She didn't actually get it straight away. The president, it was sent to the president of Harvard. He showed it around as if he'd won it. It went to the White House, and the president of the United States had a look at it, all before it actually ended up in Maria's hands.
Mm.
You know, all the men were slapping their own backs before she actually physically got it.
Yeah, at that time, they would have had the telegraph system, wouldn't they? The electric telegraph. So
that really didn't start till 1860s.
I thought that Carrington, when he measured that solar flare in 1859.
Yeah.
They actually were able to operate the system by disconnecting the batteries.
Yeah.
The batteries. So in 1859 it were on, but her discovery were a few years before that, weren't it?
Yeah, I mean,
1848. So I'm not sure on that one.
It's round about that time, but I mean, obviously, word from across the Atlantic would still probably been letter by ship rather than there wouldn't have been I don't think there was a transatlantic cable of any description by that at that time.
John Leach.
Actually, yes. Sorry about that technical problem. Excellent talk, Roy. I'm always amazed when you talk. The amount of information that you put into one of these talks is amazing. Right at the end of his talk, you actually, I think you gave a list of 4 or 5 books where you got information from. Do you actually own these books?
I've got some of them on my Kindle.
Right. How on earth do you source information like that? It must be very difficult.
Yeah, I mean that I've got three of them now on my Kindles. The one on the life letters and journals by Phoebe, the 1896 one, that is excellent. The other one I've got, I found snippets of, so I wasn't going to buy them, so I managed to get them on some of it online. The Century magazine, there's quite a few articles that she wrote there. They have archives that you can get online, yeah. So they're all available on either Google Books or if you've got a Kindle through Kindle.
Roy, could I request that you put your bibliography for the talk in the next messenger?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And in your bibliography, will you include the website for the image archive?
Will do, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking around. I can't see any more. I was going to say we can't see any more questions, but our friends from Norfolk are waving at me. So can you unmute yourself, gentlemen?
Yeah, just to say that tradition of women astronomers is still very, very strong on the east coast of the States. The current director of our group, the AAVSO, I believe she's a graduate of Vassar College, and a couple of the ladies that preceded her were also from Vassar College. You know, that whole sort of milieu.
Well, Vassar produced an awful lot of. I mean, Annie Jump Cannon later on, who did the stellar classification, and Henriette Leavitt, who did the Cepheid variables for stellar distances. They were all graduates from Vassar.
Yeah. As I say, you know, that's still continuing. So that's a sort of a rich scene of astronomers there.
Okay, thank you for that, Mike. And
Andy Dennis leaving.
And Andrew wants to speak to us again.
Yeah, just a quickie. There's a archive.org that's got a lot of the old library books from the American universities digitized. The majority of the old engineering books that I've sifted through, I found from that source, and I think they've got astronomy stuff on as well. So
You can get them on disc as well.
Yeah.
Okay, ladies and gents, I think we've worked for this part of the evening. I think we've worked Roy hard enough. So can we give him a big Mexborough Swinton Astronomical Society? Thank you.